Hi, it's Mike Stevenson here. We're going to look at Logic App versus Power Automate in this video today. So I guess if we start about the key difference between Power Automate and Logic App is the target audience at who these tools are aimed at. So Logic Apps is aimed at developers who would be building integration or automation solutions that would run on the Microsoft Azure platform. Power Automate is, again, it's a workflow technology aimed at automation and integration, but it's designed to run inside the Power Platform. It's aimed at Power Platform developers, so people who might be building Power Apps, who build Dynamics type solutions. It's also aimed at non-developers for the citizen developer, citizen integrator use cases and business users who might be doing self-service automation. So maybe you want to automate your mailbox or something like that. So key use cases, Logic Apps over here is really aimed at system-to-system workflow. So you may be integrating between a database and SAP, something like that. You're building complex workflows to take data, manipulate it, orchestrate across a bunch of systems and do that kind of EAI type integration. So we're doing process automation, system-to-system workflow. The Power Automate can do similar things, but it can also do automate myself. So this one would be an example. If you've seen a few of my blog posts in the past about, I wrote quite a cool Power Automate to manage all of my emails and kind of structure them and archive them nicely. You might do human workflow. So if you're building an application that needs some workflow where a human can get involved, you've got things like flow buttons and integration with users that can be done quite easily through Power Automate. You've then got application workflows. Now, I think this here is really a great scenario to illustrate the difference between Logic Apps and Power Automate. So because you might have a Power Platform developer who's in that Power Platform ecosystem and they need to kind of build a workflow as part of the application itself. So maybe it's you write some data to a table, it triggers a workflow that goes and gets that data you've written to the table, writes data into other tables, does lookups, and it kind of does some automation of, say in one case, a rail car gets added to your system. You might go and look up the user it's related to, look up the order, link those records together, do some other updates. That's a really great application workflow, which is slightly different conceptually to a cross-system workflow. Then we've got Power Automate Desktop. So if you're in that robotic process automation space, the Power Automate ecosystem includes Power Automate Desktop, where you're doing sort of last mile integration, where you've got something running on a machine, potentially a user's desktop or a virtual user's desktop, and you're doing sort of screen scraping type technologies where you're kind of driving the interfaces of applications to be able to do automation scenarios. Now, if we think of Power Automate as being a combination of cloud workflows and the RPA type stuff, and then you've got Insta flows and scheduled ones and stuff that are kind of various different flavors of what used to be a Microsoft flow. Let's kind of do a line separating those two types of flows. So RPA, Power Automate Desktop, it's under the same banner, but it's slightly different in terms of implementation. So for this talk, we're going to focus a bit more on the Logic App versus the sort of classic Power Automate sort of use cases. So think about the differences between the two technologies, and there's quite a few key differences here. So let's think about Power Automate and Logic Apps. Conceptually, they're workflows that can connect to APIs, can connect to systems, but they run in a different environment. So Logic Apps is tied to Azure. Power Automate, under the hood, it's actually really just Logic Apps running on Azure, but it's surfaced through the Power Platform model. So you're kind of abstracted from Azure, and you visualize your Power Automate as being part of the Office 365 and Power Platform ecosystem. So when it comes to pricing, that's where Logic Apps are part of your Azure pricing model. And Power Automate's part of your Power Platform Office 365 license and model. So there's some key differences there. Now, in terms of logic apps, you have choices around consumption, where you're pay per execute and per action. So that can support really low cost workflows, or you can pay for Logic Apps Standard, where you pay based on the compute node that it runs on. So maybe an app service plan, maybe an application services environment. So you pay per node or per execute for Logic Apps. With Power Automate, the licensing model to me is a bit more complicated because you've got a number of different plans. So you've got a per flow plan, or you've got a per user plan, where you're getting like an allowance given to the ownership of the flow, which user owns it. So there's two fairly different pricing models there that I think you have to like understand how they affect what you're going to implement. So there could be cases where you do the exact same implementation, where it could cost more in Power Automate, it could cost more in Logic Apps, or it could cost less in Power Automate and could cost more in Logic Apps. It just depends what you're doing, what other resources that you already have. So probably don't think of them as just a one-off flow or a one-off Logic app. You're probably the real world going to implement lots of them. So understanding what your journey is will help you get the best from the pricing model. Now, we said Logic Apps runs on Azure. You manage it through Azure, build it through Azure, but it can integrate with Office 365 and many other systems. Whereas Power Automate runs on Azure, you interact with it through the Power Platform, through the Office 365 portal, and it can integrate with Azure and many other things. So there's probably a couple of elevator pitches on how to describe some of the differences. Now, when we talk about the design and scalability, so if we have a look at these two bits here, there's two kind of key different understandings about these things. So if we start with Power Automate, Power Automate's designed to make workflows easy to build for people who aren't expert integration or workflow builders. So one of the good examples of this is with things like throttling and load control patterns. They're probably not things that most Power Automate builders would have to think about. So if we think about some of the customer implementations, most Power Automate flows, people are thinking about one-off irregular flows, not massive high volume. There will be some people who do that, but the bulk of executions I'd expect to be probably more around the kind of lower load scenarios. So one example of the implementation is by default, concurrency on Power Automate is usually turned off. So for example, if you do a loop, it's going to run one at a time. In Logic Apps, it's designed for high throughput and high scalability by default. That's two opposite ends of a spectrum. So with Logic Apps, by default, you're looking at loops running at 20 concurrency. And then there's much more controls with Logic Apps. If you want to scale them, you can scale out by, with things like Logic Apps Standard, you can scale out your nodes on your plans and things like that. With Power Automate, you don't really have any kind of dials and knobs you can turn to tune your flows as much. So I guess that's really probably you look past the workflow that you build to how it runs, how you get it to run efficiently. That's really where Logic Apps has options that Power Automate just doesn't. Now, when it comes to building the workflows, there's a few differences here as well. So with Power Platform, Power Automate, so you're building your workflow in the browser as part of the Office 365 portal. You're not really coding it in a coding tool. So, if you look on the other side with Logic Apps, you can build them in Visual Studio, in VS Code. You can build them in the portal if you want. You've got a few choices there depending on what your developers prefer, whereas with Power Automate, you really only have build it in the browser. So that then has the knock-on effect about things like developer practices and DevOps capabilities. So with Power Automate, so one of the good things in Power Automate is you can leverage the solution model, which puts you in the ecosystem of how people deploy DevOps practices around Power Apps. So if you've got if you're using something like the I can't remember what it's called now, the Center for Excellence tool for helping you do automated builds and deploys for Power Apps, you can leverage that for Power Automate. So go and check the Center of Excellence documentation for that, which is really good. It's aimed to give you a low code or a lower code experience to be able to deploy DevOps for Power Automate, which is a good tick in the box. But the fact that you need a DevOps experience for Power Automate is kind of a contradiction in a way, because the Power Automate sort of elevator pitch is really about low code. So that you've got that challenge of, well, if it's low code, why do we need DevOps? But then in the real world, you need some equivalent of a DevOps process for cross-environment deployments. So the tooling's quite good for that. If you have to look at the pipelines under the hood, they're pretty complicated. So that the work you have to do with Power Platform to do DevOps is complicated, and there's a lot to it. But the tooling abstracts a lot of that away. So once you've got it set up, it should be easy to do. With Logic Apps, the DevOps experience, there is a little bit of a learning curve to learn how to do it, but Logic Apps are really just either consumption ones are part of an ARM template. Logic Apps standard is really just a function app running on effectively a function app in the cloud. So you get all of the deployment practices that you're used to with function apps come into play at this point. There's a few extra things that you have to do specific to Logic Apps around the configuration models and stuff, but there's lots of practices that a developer, it all ties back to this target audience at the top. If you're a developer, Logic Apps is going to have lots of the DevOps experience things you're used to. If you're a Power Platform developer or a sort of an application developer or a business user, Power Automate's going to have the type of DevOps experience that'll be made simpler for those low code implementations. Then finally, the key overlaps are, so the key thing is the overlap about them both being workflows is the really important thing. That's the benefit and the confusion in one line. The fact that they're both workflows means you're always balancing this. Is it one versus the other? They're just aimed at different target audiences. They run on a different platform so that they're made easier in Power Automate, but they have more control and more sort of tuning knobs in Logic Apps. That's really the kind of crux of it. They all have access to API connectors as well. So with Logic Apps and Power Automate, you've got the cloud connectors, which opens up connectivity to like hundreds of applications nowadays. Logic Apps standard does also have the built-in connectors, which opens up like high performance options where you can leverage function bindings if you're in Azure, which would give you faster throughput and stuff like that. And I guess maybe one bit I haven't got on the slide here, one of the biggest key difference not mentioned is also the networking. So currently Power Automate's SaaS workflows in the Office 365 environments, there's no network connectivity. You could argue you can use the data gateway, the Power BI data gateway, which you can leverage from Logic Apps as well. Can let you have some capability to go inside a network, but those Power Automate flows aren't part of that network. Whereas with Logic Apps, consumption can use the data gateway. Logic Apps Standard has the ability to connect to a network, your own private network, to support inbound and outbound private connectivity. So there's a key difference there as well. One of the difference I forgot to mention was I guess when we come to like Logic Apps versus Power Automate, there's some advanced features in Logic Apps that Power Automate doesn't have. So if you're doing enterprise integration scenarios, perhaps you're coming from a BizTalk migration background. So in Logic Apps, you've got a bunch of features such as the ability to execute inline code, the ability to call an integration account to execute complex maps done with the BizTalk mapper, with XSL, schema validation, and a whole bunch of features like that come with Logic Apps that aren't really available in Power Automate. So those kind of scenarios would definitely favour Logic Apps. Likewise with Power Automate, I touched on it a little bit earlier. There's a few features for those human workflow scenarios. So things like being able to call out to users, being able to interact with a button click from the Power Automate app. Those kind of features would come with Power Automate. That wouldn't come with Logic Apps. That's really the kind of human workflow versus system to system workflow fundamental difference in some of the target use cases for Logic Apps and Power Automate. Okay, so let's look at an example here of this architecture just to help explain some of the differences. So here we've got two domains. So we've got our customer experience team and our enterprise integration team building different solutions. They need to work together. So here we've got a scenario where we've got an integration platform. One of the interfaces in the platform gets data from rail cars traveling around. It integrates through event hubs and other AIS technologies. So, commonly if you're doing Logic Apps, you probably have API management, event hub, service bus, and these might integrate the rail car data with systems up at the top here like SAP, Maximo, IBM, Azure Synapse, and many other technologies. And one of the things that your integration platform could do in this example is it also updates the Dataverse every time a railcar update comes in. Now, this from a, if you think about the application boundaries here, so we've got this big red line down the middle here is our boundary between the integration platform and the customer experience application. Likewise, we've got boundaries on each of these lines between the IBM Maximo team, the SAP team, and the Synapse data platform team. So Logic Apps and our Azure integration services are sitting between all those applications, passing data across those boundaries. So when we cross the boundary into the customer experience platform, we create this record in the Dataverse here. Now, in this example, what we're doing is we trigger a Power Automate flow down here when a record comes in and it says that a rail car's been delivered. And what we're doing is we have a workflow that triggers off that record update. It gets the data from the Dataverse, it gets a template from SharePoint, then it generates a document as a PDF, and then it sends via Exchange to the customer that PDF document to say your rail car's been delivered. Here's a certificate that says we've delivered it. And that puts a really good example of the difference between an application workflow running inside the domain of the customer experience platform versus a Logic app, which is running inside the integration platform, doing that cross-system workflow. I think this is a really good example of what it looks like when you've got these two technologies doing their core use cases. So Power Automate doing the application domain workflow, and Logic Apps doing the cross-system workflow. Now, things do get more complicated because these technologies can have lots of overlaps. So, for example, you will get some companies who'll go, well, we're building some stuff in Power Platform, but it's possible that I could just get my Power Automate to call from my application domain into my other systems because they can, because you have the connectors. That's really an architecture decision at that point. Because you can, there's also a question of should you. Now, in some companies, it might be absolutely fine. You might make a strategic decision that your integration is happening through Power Automate. There may also be cases of systems of engagement where you want to build these sort of rapid prototyping applications. So you want to try stuff out where that makes sense as well. But there will be a lot of other companies where they would go, well, actually, our Power Automate needs to call into other systems. So we'll call back to the integration platform. Maybe you expose an API, and then the integration platform abstracts how you get that data. So this really all comes down to how much do you want to couple your systems together. So do you want to couple your customer experience application to these line of business apps here, or do you want to couple them to an API that's exposed on your integration platform, and then you can kind of hide away how you actually get the data it needs. To me, as companies mature and do more with these technologies, I think that second one down here is the place you probably want to go to because it's more mature, it's more enterprise-like uses. You would give yourself more flexibility and less coupling between applications. But I think you'll get a lot of companies who start doing that route because you can and because it lets you accelerate fast. And you just need to manage it. I would say doing number one by default all the time is going to end up where your power automates become complicated, and that quick agility will eventually start slowing you down later because you'll have so much coupling between your systems that you'll want to get upgrade your Maximo, and then half your power automates kind of don't work because that's going on, or all these other complexities that kind of come into there. Okay, so hopefully that was an interesting video discussing some of the differences between Power Automate and Logic Apps. There's different ways to look at it. I'm sure Power Automate developers would have slightly different views on this because that's the tool that they're used to using. I'm sure Logic Apps developers would have slightly different angles on this because they usually use Logic Apps. There's an element of if you use a certain tool, you always solve a problem the same way. Was it? If you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail kind of thing. I think in this discussion, what we're really wanting to do is look at it from an architecture perspective, understand what the different tools do and which problems they best solve on their own, and which problems are best solved by making the two tools work together, which I hope this diagram has illustrated. Before we wrap this video up, one of my colleagues just reminded me of a really great question we had that I'm just going to edit into this video. So we had a scenario very similar to the one you see on the screen here, where we implemented a workflow which could have been done either in Logic Apps or Power Automate. In this case, we chose to do it in Power Automate, and the idea was similar to this one here. We had data updating in Dataverse. It would trigger a document being generated, and that went to a customer. Now, what all through the video so far, we've really focused slightly more on the tool differences and the technology questions that you're thinking about here, but we did touch a little bit on the people bit, and I think there's a really important element in terms of people and skills as to which choice you would make on these. So in our example, one of the cases was that we had this Power Automate that was developed because at the time we were investing heavily in our Dataverse platform. We had a number of Dataverse developers or Power App developers at the time, and it really made sense because we had a lot of people in that team to implement the solution we needed for generating the document as a Power Automate. Now, what happened is, as that project finished, we then reduced the size of the team that were working with with the Power Platform, because it went into maintenance mode where we're just supporting the application rather than aggressively building new features in it. So that team downsized. Some consultants left, a couple of people went to new jobs, and we're now in a support mode with that application. But in the integration platform, we've got other projects going on, and we've got a bigger integration team, whereas originally we had a smaller integration team and a bigger Power Platform team. Now, from a support perspective, the question we have now is, because that Power Automate was developed inside Power Platform, obviously as a Power Automate in a solution, if ever, let's say, for argument's sake, let's say this diagram represents the solution. So let's say this bit here, sorry, let's go back a second. Right, so let's say this bit here needs to change, right? So the question would be, business come along with a new requirement, we need to modify the Power Automate. The problem we've got now is that the team is smaller than it was. So let's just make some arbitrary numbers up. We've got 10 people in the integration team, 2 people in the Power Automate, in the Power App team now. It used to be the other way around just because of the nature of how your organization changes. So we've only got two people who could update that Power Automate, but they obviously also do other project work and other stuff now. The problem is that in the integration team, so on the positive side, Power Automate and Logic Apps, so here and here, they're cloud-based workflows. They're very similar. It wouldn't be that difficult for a Logic App developer to change a Power Automate and vice versa for a Power Automate developer to change a Logic App. So that's good. That's one of the good things. But you need to invest more in just the ability to change the workflow. So now, let's say our two Power App developers, they're busy on a project. The business wants this changed. We've got a spare Logic App developer who's just finished on a project. But the problem is the Logic App developer can easily change the Power Automate, but they need to understand the bigger picture about Power Platform, which may be skills they're not familiar in. So in this case, they'd need to go and learn how to do automated deployments of Power Automate. They'd need to go and learn about what else is in that solution. So if that flows inside a solution with other stuff, they may need to be aware of other changes that are in flight, table changes, application changes. The solution goes as one unit. So you need to know about all the other things in the solution. So while it's lower code, low code doesn't mean low complexity. It just means there's less code and more visual UI. So I think that's a key message there is even though Power Automate might be pitched as simpler, it doesn't necessarily mean less complex. The same is true the other way around. So we've just talked about this here, and there's a good argument to say, if we knew the team structures were going to change, it might have been better to build that Power Automate as a Logic App, because that Logic App wouldn't have had the dependency on the rest of the Power App solution. You could have just built that Logic App as a self-isolated flow on its own that you could change and deploy, which would be much easier for the Logic App team to develop. But if, let's say, the team structures were the other way around, let's say we originally built it as a Logic App, we've now got 2 integration developers and 10 Power Platform developers. So the Power Platform developers, they may not be as familiar with Azure, so they can come and change the workflow in the Azure portal over here really easy. That's the easy bit. But then they suddenly need to know about, well, how does our Azure DevOps deployment process work? How do I configure the Logic Apps when they're deployed? It may be more complex, and they may need to know about service buses and API managements and that kind of thing. So again, there's complexity there, and I think this is where it's not just a technology decision. It's interesting to understand what's the journey of the teams in your organization. How are you going to support these solutions longer term? A decision you make today might be made differently in the future, depending on what technologies you're going to invest in, what skills you're going to invest in. If you're going to outsource one team and you suddenly have to pay a vendor to make changes for you as opposed to making them yourself, that might impact how you decide to change, which technology you would choose. If, for example, in this case, let's say we had to pay a third party to update our Power Automate flow, but our internal integration team could update the Logic app, there's going to be a big cost difference. And it could be the other way around. It might be that you outsource your integration and keep your Power Automate in-house. So you need to think through these non-technical things about how you're going to maintain your solutions to help make the right architecture decisions up front. Thank you for listening. Love to hear feedback on other things people would like to see in this series. We'll be having other videos coming up discussing other technology choice topics. Cheers.